the Basketball Manitoba podcast, we have Joey Johnson. Joey was one of the best wheelchair basketball players in the world. He is a graduate of Lorette Collegiate and represented Manitoba at the club and provincial team level for 19 consecutive years. He played wheelchair basketball at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, where he was an All-American and led his team to 2 national championships in 1996 and 1999. He competed in 5 Paralympic Games, where he saw the podium 4 times, winning 1 silver and 3 gold medals. He also competed in 5 World Championships, bringing home the gold 1 time and the bronze medal twice. He is a member of the Sports Manitoba Hall of Fame, class of 2016, the Basketball Manitoba Hall of Fame, class of 2013, and he received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. Joey is currently the assistant coach of the Canadian Men's Wheelchair Basketball Program, as well as the program coordinator for Manitoba Wheelchair Sports Association. Joey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I got to get right into this. I have no idea what the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal is. So what, I have to ask that right off the top, what does that represent and why did you receive it?
You would ask that question off the top. I have no idea. It's one of those things where you end up getting so many awards throughout the course of your career, and they kind of just pile up and end up in a closet. So I would have to research that a little bit before I could tell you what it is. I seriously, my Paralympic medals, which are now in the Basketball Hall of Fame, I had in a shopping bag in my closet for the longest time. And so it was when Ross Wedlake actually heard that. He's like, well, we could always display those for you and give them to us. So that's where they are right now. But yeah, that's kind of what that's not why I played sport. I'll say that. I didn't do it for all the accolades and stuff. I did it for the personal challenges and the fun of playing with a team.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I mean, I think the fact that you said you're like, I don't even know what that award is, speaks to that. And it also speaks to the fact that you received a lot of awards, because you started off, the sentence you started off, you said, when you receive this many awards, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. But that is a good point. Like, again, you don't even kind of remember what that's about, because again, it wasn't about those things for you, right?
So it wasn't. That might have sounded a little arrogant too, but it's true. It's you don't know what half it is. You gold medal here, gold medal there. It's like, I don't know.
Exactly. I wouldn't say it's arrogant. You were just stating the truth, right? And I don't know. The truth can be arrogant, but this was not one of those situations. I think I was just curious. I was like, what is this one? Like, of course I know it, if you're an All-American, all that stuff. It's like, yeah, I get that, but this one was on there. And whenever you're receiving a medal from, that's named after the royalty, I mean, it must be a big deal here. So I had to ask.
Put me on the spot. All right.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I don't know, man. Come on. Like, do you want me to go look in my big tub of medals and figure this out?
I'll Google it real quick for you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny because I intentionally didn't Google it because I wanted to see what your response was. And I was like, well, we'll see what Joe says. But so if the people who are listening right now, go ahead, Google it and like send a message. Yeah, you can let us know exactly what it is. So, so I wanted to go back to the start. When we were offline, I mentioned, and I kind of, apologized. I mean, it wasn't a true, like, authentic apology, but it was more so the fact that, like, I know only what I know about wheelchair basketball, and there's a lot, and I don't know what I don't know. Right? There's a huge blind spot. There's an ignorance there. I just don't know the game. I tried it once. I do know, again, obviously, there's Paralympic Games. Sure, I know that it's a game that's played, but there's little nuances that are different than again, even this. What do people wheelchair just call it? Normal basketball? Like, what do you even call it? So, like, there's these little ignorant things that I just don't understand. So I kind of want, in saying all of that and prefacing this entire question, I just wanted to ask you, like, how did you get involved in wheelchair basketball? And before you played wheelchair basketball, were you playing, non-wheelchair basketball?
Well, I got involved quite young. I was 8 years old and I was diagnosed with a hip disease in my right hip called Legg-Perthes, and it's a bone degenerative disease that affected the range of motion, the bone development there. So I was no longer able to participate in able-bodied sports, and that's what we kind of call the running game, able-bodied, the running game, stuff like that. So got it. Yeah, so when I was 8, I was diagnosed with that, and I was a very active kid. I love sports, running around, playing street hockey, ice hockey. I would try basketball, soccer, football. Any sport I can get my hands on, whatever my friends were doing at that time kind of thing, I would do it. I was addicted to sports. And I'll never forget, I had pain in my leg and I was doing a summer hockey camp at the time, and my parents just thought I'd pulled a muscle. So went to the doctor, and it's sitting there like, okay, like, let's get on with this kind of thing. And he came in and it's like, okay, I've got some news for you. You have this hip disease called leg perthes. I'm like, okay, when can I get back on the ice? Basically was my mentality. And he's like, no, you're done. You won't be playing able-bodied sports anymore. I might be paraphrasing that a little bit, but that was what I remember right there.
Yeah.
Very emotional time for me. I didn't leave that doctor's office for probably another hour as I sat in my mom's lap just bawling, because all I heard was, hockey's done. Sports are done. So I credit my parents with this. They went out and they searched, and this is before the internet, right? This is 1984, 85, somewhere in that range. And they searched high and low, looking for activities for me to do. And they came across adaptive sports, wheelchair sports in particular. And ironically enough, when I first started, I hated it. I was in a bit of denial. I was like, I don't need a wheelchair. I don't want to use that. I tried to shoot a basket, and as an 8-year-old kid, we didn't have minis back then, so I'm using a men's-sized ball with a 10-foot hoop. I couldn't get the ball 4 feet off the ground, let alone up above the rim. So I thought wheelchair basketball is the sport ever. But I was around a bunch of my peers who were going through similar situations, whether it was through an accident or a congenital birth defect or whatever it was, that needed to use a wheelchair to compete in sports. And those competitive juices kind of started flowing in me. I'm watching it. I'll never forget. It was a Tuesday program. It used to just be you get these kids out. We would play tag, British Bulldogs, just learn how to use the chairs, how to pick up a ball, how to throw a ball that could relate to any sport, basically. And I'm kind of sitting on the sideline like this, like I'm not playing. And this kid kind of comes up, get in the chair. Come on. Kind of challenged me, and I'm like, well, okay, you want to challenge me? Like, game on. And I got out there and he's pushing circles around me. I'm like, oh, this is tough. But obviously over time I kind of grew, got a little stronger. I didn't do basketball for the first couple of years because I wasn't good. And it was over time that I kind of gradually got back into that. Actually, sledge hockey was my sport of choice there, or para ice hockey as they call it now. And we had a strong program here in Manitoba, and I did that for a number of years. And then that program kind of folded, and that's how I ended up back into basketball. I love team sports. I guess I was always attracted to the team sports. I did tennis, track and field, and stuff like that. But to me, it's no fun when you play a sport and you can't celebrate with somebody, right? You hit a nice shot in tennis, you're high-fiving yourself. It's not the same as when you hit a three-pointer and get to high-five your teammates and stuff like that. So that's how I ended up back in basketball anyway. And so, long story short, I had a pretty long and successful career.
Well, I would say so. Yeah. So, I mean, you obviously, like you said, you started playing, I think it was sledge hockey, and now it's called, para hockey?
Para ice hockey.
Para ice hockey. And the program folded, and just out of that fact, you kind of say, well, I want to keep playing sports. And so there just happened to be a basketball program that was available?
At that time, we didn't have a junior program here in Manitoba. So I was competing, I was going to men's practices and stuff. And as a young kid, that could be quite intimidating when you're 20 and 30-year-old men out there. But they were trying to start a junior program here. We had a good group of young kids coming up, and there was a couple kids, one buddy of mine, his name was Kenny Hall, and he's like, come on, we need you. We need more numbers. So kind of dragged me out, and we started the junior program there. It's been going pretty much ever since, some highs and lows as far as the numbers go, but yeah.
So then who are some of those, like, obviously you transfer over and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. You had mentioned a friend that kind of encouraged you to play. Were there some, whether it be your coach or other people that kind of kept you going? Because I mean, you probably weren't necessarily, the player you turned out to be back then. You were still in development. You're like, oh, I play the game. So obviously, typically in those cases, you have people who kind of like, keep you going or are giving you opportunity to play or mentoring you in some regard.
Yeah, absolutely. So the guy who actually got me involved, his name is Jake Smelly. He's a double amputee, and he was working at, I think it's called Manitoba Possible now. Back then it was called Manitoba Society for Manitobans with Disabilities. And he's the one who actually kind of got me out to join the junior program and the Tuesday program and all that. And he played as well. He's a very good wheelchair racquetball player. So he kind of dragged me out. But then what kind of kept me going out is wheelchair basketball is probably the most unique sport on the planet, where the wheelchair is the great equalizer. If I sit in a wheelchair, there's no difference between me and you on that court. And so here in Canada, we actually encourage able-bodied participation in the sport. So this gave me an outlet where I could bring my brother, I have an older brother, and my younger sister, and all my friends, all my peer group from my previous life, I got to bring out, and we got to compete on a level playing field again. You know, that was kind of taken away from me when I got my hip disease, and all of a sudden this is presented again to me. So that kind of kept me going, because we had a Monday night rec league here, and we had 5 or 6 teams that would compete in it. And my team consisted of my neighborhood friends, you know, and so nice. it was fun. It gave me that opportunity to play and compete with my friends and siblings again.
That's cool. So I want to ask you a technical question here. I know we're veering a little bit away from the beginning of your story, but you know, this is your first time. You know, you find out you have the hip disease, and then you had mentioned, you told the story there about the guys like, come play, like, let's go, I'm gonna kick your butt, and then you got out there. So what was it like learning how to kind of move in the chair? And then I guess the next question is are in the same vein, sports like this, the chairs that you play like basketball in, or even other stuff, are vastly different than like just the average wheelchair on the street, right? So can you kind of maybe just, you know, for us that don't know, like compare the differences and like what makes, because I know, like, for example, like I see like the wheels, for example, are on that angle, right? Because obviously you're going to be like taking tight turns and stuff. So could you, I don't know, maybe just talk about your experience adapting to like being in a chair and pushing with your arms and all that, and then maybe some of the differences between a normal chair and
I can tell you, when I first started off, it's like learning to walk all over again, but with your hands, and you get blisters, and it's a miserable time, because at the end of the day your shoulders are sore. Like, it's challenging, but the more you do something, the better you get, obviously. But I started in the early to mid 80s, and the equipment was very different than what we're using today. Okay. Like, these sports chairs have come miles as far as the lightweight, durability, and all that. One of the first sports chairs I had was called a Quadra, other than your basic folding hospital chair, because that's kind of what I started in, and then it moved to a Quadra, and that's when we got the camber. That's where the wheels are tilted and stuff, and you can control that angle, the center of gravity of the chair, so you can actually go faster and stuff. Another big difference is today we have the 5th wheel or the 6th wheel that's at the back of the chair, so it stabilizes the chair, and it enables you to move your center of gravity even further forward, makes the chairs even that much faster. Well, back in the day, we didn't have that, and guys didn't strap in the chair, so we had paraplegics and stuff falling all over the floor.
No way.
The game was a lot slower back then than it is now, because now everyone straps in.
Yeah.
The analogy I always use when I do give school presentations is, imagine you're playing basketball and your shoes are untied. You can still play and you're okay, but once you tie those shoes up, they're a part of your body. It's an extension. Well, it's the same thing with the chair. Once you strap into that chair, it cinches you in there, and all of a sudden it's a part of your body. It's just an extension of you. So those are the big things. The camber is obviously big, and we've started tilting the chairs now, so we get up on the one wheel to gain that height advantage.
Yeah.
I was actually probably the first higher class player. So there's a classification system in wheelchair basketball. 1 meaning that you're probably paralyzed from your chest down, so your balance isn't as strong, to 4-5 in half-point increments, and I would be at 4-5. And for the 5 players on the court, you can't exceed 14 points. So it's a bit of a math. The coach has to be pretty good at math too, right? So it's not just a center for a center kind of thing. You got to figure out, you're a 3, you're a 4, 5. Okay, yeah, we can make that sub kind of thing. But yeah, I was one of the first players in Canada, if not the first player in Canada, to use a strap to strap myself into the chair,
really, and
to start tilting. Yeah.
Huh. So you're kind of, at least in Canada, you're somewhat of a pioneer.
I am. So it happened when I was at Whitewater University. I was roommates with a guy named Troy Sachs. He is probably the best player in the world in the mid 90s. Australia won the gold medal in 96, my first Paralympics. And he was the first player in the world to strap as a high point player and to tilt his chair. And at the time, the officials didn't know how to call it. Like, they're like, that's an advantage. You're cheating. You can't do that. And we're like, no, it's like dunking in the able-bodied game, right? Like, back in the day, that was frowned upon. Like, oh, you don't do that, But as we evolved as people, I don't know, that's freaking amazing. You can do more of that, So it's the same kind of thing with the tilting and the hopping of the chair and stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've seen like highlights and stuff, and it's like, to be honest with you, I couldn't even imagine playing it because I would be so scared with like some of the collisions and the contact that takes place. And again, this is obviously something that you like get used to, but
For sure.
like, you know, your hands are, it's just like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, things are hitting and they're crashing. And I was like, it looks like such a physical sport. And then, you know, with like all those things that you're kind of explaining with like it's
funny because it's a non-contact sport, but there's a ton of contact in the sport.
Of course. Well, so that's the same thing. Like with, you know, with running basketball, as you called it, it's like, you know, I think someone told me this. I think Adam Wedlick always says it, but it's like, it is a contact sport. It's just not a collision sport. But when I watch wheelchair, it looks like a collision sport. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like that, he separates that way, but I'm like wheelchair might be a collision sport, even though you're saying it isn't. So
yeah, that's for sure.
So we talked kind of about like, you know, who kind of kept you going in the game there. So when did you realize you were actually pretty good? Like, you're like, I'm pretty good at this.
Oh, I probably would have been around 13, 14, 15 in that range. And I started competing with our senior men's team here in Manitoba and traveling to the national championships. But I was still pretty ignorant myself as far as what the sport was and how good I was. I just knew like, oh, they asked me to travel. Like, oh, sure, I'll do that. I wasn't playing a ton, but I was still competing as a teenager with all the men. And then I probably would have been about 16 the first time the national team coach came up and started talking to me and asked me what my interests were as far as education and how much I trained per week, which wasn't much at that. I was still doing it for fun. I didn't think of this as high performance at all. I was thinking this is purely recreational and I'm having a good time with my buddies and my brother. And like I said, but it was after that conversation, I'm kind of like, oh, what's going on here? And it would have been, in the early 90s, wheelchair basketball still wasn't a part of the Canada Games yet, and they were trying to get it into the Winter Games, and 95 was going to be the first one. So they wanted to have a kind of an identification camp throughout Canada, bring in all of the of-age kids just to see what they were working with in every province and if they could actually pull this off and make it a part of the Canada Games. And it was at that camp I was approached. I would have been probably 16 or 17 by one of the university coaches who just asked me, you know, what are your plans for the future? And at that time I was, well, still am a bit of a lost soul, I guess, but I'm like, I don't know. I just want to play ball and have fun kind of thing. He's like, well, do you ever think of getting an education while you're doing it? I'm like, well, I didn't even know that was an option. So it was kind of in that time frame, I guess, in my mid to late teens where I kind of realized that, you know, I'm not bad at this, but I didn't realize where I could go at that time and, you know, how long I could do it for as well. For
sure. Yeah. You had no idea that this would be the case where we were reading off all your accolades and you can say, yeah, I don't know what the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee medal is. Don't worry about that.
Exactly.
So, you know, you obviously went on to play University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I'm going to assume that's in Wisconsin somewhere. But, you know, I kind of want to talk about that because, you know, I know, and, you know, people get recruited, like you had mentioned, you had a college coach come to talk to you. I don't know if this is the same coach. So I guess the question is, was that the same coach that you ended up going to play for? And if not, what was that process like of like finding schools? Were other schools after you and saying, hey, Joe, we want you to come here? What did that look like?
Well, there are a few schools in the U.S. Back when I was playing that had adaptive sports programs, wheelchair basketball in particular. University of Illinois, University of Texas, Arlington, and University of Whitewater were the three bigger schools. Now, I say bigger as far as adaptive programs go. University of Whitewater is a small Division III school. It's only within the UW system, but it has a fully adaptive campus, and that's kind of how they started their program. Is they had all these kids with disabilities coming, and they needed a sporting outlet, and so they started the program there. I didn't get heavily recruited, so the reason I got to go to Whitewater, there was two players at the time from Canada that were going there. Mike Frogley was a student, and Grant Strobach. And so the coach at the time, his name was Fred Wendt, and that's the guy I was talking to. The camp was out in Ottawa, and I was talking to him there, and Frogley's like, oh yeah, you should come. Well, it turns out it took me about a year and a half to kind of make up my mind that that's what I wanted to do. And in that time, Fred ended up stepping down as the coach, and Mike Frogley stepped in as the coach.
Got it.
And so that kind of set up a whole, you know, path for the rest of my basketball career, because Mike Frogley went on to be my coach in college for the first 3 years. Then he also became the Canadian men's national team head coach. And that, really paved the way for me. But now there's even more adaptive wheelchair basketball programs in the US. There's probably, I would say, about 15 colleges that offer full ride scholarship for wheelchair basketball. Arizona has a program, University of Edinburgh, like the list goes on. So I was kind of, I wouldn't say a pioneer, because I know most of the schools started, like U of I started in the 60s, I believe, and then Whitewater came around in the 70s. But it was kind of in the 90s when it really started to boom and the numbers started going up. And now all the junior programs in the US, it's like a feeding system to the college program. So it's pretty neat to see. You get to watch these kids grow up playing basketball and go to school and go on to the national team. So
just having more opportunities for people to
absolutely
and get their education. So then, like you had mentioned, now there's about 15 schools. So when it comes to national championships, are all the schools that have those programs, are they just playing in one conference together? Like, again, and I guess this is really only something that takes place in the United States, correct? Like in Canada, in our collegiate, we don't have any of that.
That's right. Yeah. So it's an American system. I believe there's 2 or 3 divisions now within the conference. Okay. So they try and reduce the travel as much as possible, because like Arizona going to Texas and Wisconsin. So I think they kind of do the Midwest and the South, and then the West as well. But it's pretty intense. They just had their championship a couple weeks ago, and University of Texas Arlington won this year. So
nice.
Got to get Whitewater back on the map.
I was gonna say, yeah, you got to. How did they do?
I believe they got 3rd.
Okay,
top 3 is not bad. Yeah,
top 3 is not bad at all. I mean, again, like in a Paralympic Games, that's a bronze medal, right?
It's a podium.
Exactly, it's a podium. So I kind of want to talk about the Paralympic Games. I mean, we mentioned like you played in, I think it was 5, correct?
I played in 5. I've coached in 2 now. So
so we've been to 7. So I kind of want to ask you just directly, is like that first experience, what do you remember about it? First time there, and how old were you?
So it was 96. So I would have just turned 21, my first games. So it's 2021, preparing for that. My first experience, it was overwhelming. It was one of those things that was almost surreal. The opening ceremony, you walk out into a stadium, I think there was close to 65, 70,000 people there. And then Sydney got bigger. There's 110, I think, at those opening ceremonies. So it's hard to describe, like that energy that you feel, the goosebumps that you get when you feel that is crazy. But Atlanta was my first, and looking back at it, it was very disappointing. I didn't know at the time, because it was my first, and it is very special because it was my first, but a lot of the sponsors had pulled out after the Olympics. So the Paralympics kind of got the shaft.
Okay.
They didn't do a great job of publicizing it to the general public. A lot of ignorance and I can't blame that for the people for their ignorance part, if we're not willing to help educate. But there's a lot of confusion there going down, thinking the Paralympics were the Special Olympics, stuff like that. And nothing against the Special Olympics. It's a great event, but it's not the Paralympics. It's 2 very distinct, unique competitions. And we finished 5th. So, I mean, at the time I thought, this is awesome, 5th. But,
yeah.
Looking back, no, I'm like, it's kind of disappointing, but yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, it's funny because now you have that, like you've went to a whole bunch. So it's like, if that was your only one ever,
absolutely,
it would have been like, hey, you know what? Amazing. You wouldn't have known what could have been.
It's hindsight, right?
Exactly. And so how would you compare and contrast that first experience to now your last experience playing?
Well,
you're much older, but like, I mean, you specifically, you're a much older guy. And I was assuming that like you may have been looking like this might be my last time playing at this point.
Well, 2012 was my last one. And I kind of knew in the back of my head going in that, I was living in Europe at the time. I was playing professionally in Germany. I had a family, 3 kids, and they were all fairly young. And I was missing out a lot, Life of an elite athlete keeps you away from home a fair bit. So I knew that I was tired of traveling, especially living in Europe, competing with Canada. I'd have to come fly over here often for training camps and stuff. So it was in the back of my mind. But the funny thing is I never have officially retired. I never actually gave that notice. I've always kept that, card available to play if I ever want to make a comeback in my 50s, I guess. But it changed so much. London did a phenomenal job. So every game's got a little bit better, I'd say. Like Sydney, they did a great job educating the public. The support that we received there, they had school kids coming out, packed stadiums for every game. Athens was pretty good, then Beijing, but then London, Channel 4 over there, they got behind it. They were running segments on educating the public about the game. So all these questions that you have, like, pardon my ignorance, like they were breaking down that before the games even started. So going in, people actually knew what they were looking for. They knew the athletes to look for, and they knew the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. And so it is phenomenal. And to end my career in London with the last gold medal of my career, I couldn't have asked for a better fairy tale ending to it. So
that's awesome. And it's cool to hear that, like, obviously the awareness and I guess maybe the respect for the sports that were being played was given over time. It got better and better, right?
That's right.
Behind it. And I think that's super important. What I was going to ask you here. So you had mentioned, playing pro, and I saw that, we didn't read that necessarily in the intro, but you're playing in Germany. I always ask this, like, for people who are playing basketball, I'm like, well, what's it like playing pro? And I didn't even know that there was pro leagues for wheelchair. So I don't know. Can you just talk about it a little bit? I mean, how many teams are there? Just some of those dynamics that, I have no idea. Like, I didn't even know this existed, Joey. So like,
yeah, so I've had an opportunity to play professionally, semi-professionally, I'd say, in Australia as well.
Okay.
So I played 2 seasons there in Wollongong, and then I moved to Germany. And Germany, I was a full-time professional athlete there. Now, not every team has professional athletes. Our club, we were able to afford, at the heyday, probably up to 6 professional athletes.
Okay.
And then the rest were getting, like, their gas money covered and stuff like that. Yeah. But, I was making a living salary off of it. And I can tell you, having been in the real world now, quote unquote,
yeah.
Being an athlete, getting paid to play a game that you would normally pay money to play, nothing beats it. You're living the dream.
Absolutely. So how many years did you do that in Germany?
I was in Germany for 9 years.
Okay.
Won 8 German championships, 8 German cups, and 5 European Champions Cups. So wow. I had some success playing club basketball over there. In the league, there is typically, so they do like the soccer format where if you start off in the second league, you got to get promoted to the top league and all that kind of thing. So in the Bundesliga, I'd say there's probably 12 teams, 12 to 18, I guess, 12, 15, depending on the season.
Okay.
And traveled all over Germany doing that. And then with the Champions Cup, which is the European level, you have to qualify, have enough points at the top level to get into that. Mm-hmm. There's different levels of the cups as well. So yeah, it's fun. You get to travel Europe, getting paid to play basketball,
no
right?
Kidding.
So it's worst things you can do in life. I'm sure
no kidding. So the club that you played for, and then the other clubs that had teams, were those same clubs? Like, did they have running basketball teams as well? Is it the same kind of thing, or were they completely separate?
My club didn't. The club I played for was called RSV Londil, and it was started based off of an adaptive sports club. So they offered all kinds of sports like archery, shooting, table tennis, and then the basketball kind of broke away and started a professional unit chapter of it. There were some clubs though that do have the able-bodied game as well. In Europe, for instance, like Galatasaray, huge soccer club. They started a wheelchair basketball club based under that umbrella as well. So it depends on which club that you're with. Some have able-bodied sports tied in with it. Others are just adaptive sport clubs.
Yeah, I'm always so interested in the club system out in Europe because I'm somewhat like envious of it in the sense that I wish we had something like that here.
I wish we did too, honestly.
Yeah, because the thing that I like about it is you hear that in some, depending on the country, of course, it varies. Like you mentioned, and then the club is sometimes they'll literally have a soccer team, a basketball team, and like multiple sports under the same club name, the same club banner. And it just allows you to have you're pooling resources essentially, right? Like you're making it more rather than just like, hey, we just have this one basketball club. It's way harder to kind of have that as a thing. Whereas this, you can share resources and stuff like that. And, and then you can even scale it down with age, right? So you can have people playing younger in the club. So I think it's just a way better development model.
I 100% agree. And the way the sponsorships work and stuff, like you say, that pool that money and it kind of gets shared. Obviously, the top end is getting the lion's share, but they're also in it to develop their next gen athletes. Like they want their program to be successful, so they can't just blow all the money here. They got to spread it out, and it works well.
Exactly.
But our club was very successful. We had a fan club, probably about 500 fans in the fan club, and our home games, we probably get 2,000, 2,500 people out for our home games. And but my last Champions Cup was down in Istanbul, Turkey, and we played Galatasaray in the Champions Cup final, and we ended up beating them on their home court. But it was nuts. Like the stadium was packed with banging drums, lighting flares, like
all the crazy stuff that you hear about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, the flare thing, that's always crazy. I heard about that, like the flares, and like you see little highlights on social media. It'll be like I saw one clips where someone puts the camera and up in the top corner of the arena, people are shooting flares off, and you're like, what's going on? Like this is.
Well, I don't get it either, because you're in a gym. Like the smoke is filling up. They have to postpone games because it's kind of a soccer. Hooligan kind of thing to do.
Very much. It like totally comes from that soccer background. But I hear stories about people that you talk with people like yourself that played overseas, and they always have a story like about something crazy like that happening, or even just like the difference between the fandom or like the interaction with the referees or things like that. It's very, very, very different than.
Well, they're so passionate about it, especially because they get attached to the club, as we're talking about. So they could have a multitude of sports under it, but they don't care if that's club like Galatasaray, if it's their table tennis team playing, they're there full force, lighting flares, like go from football on down. Like they support that club through thick and thin. And I think that's another benefit, like you said, of having that club system. It's like you can have you could have someone on those teams that literally were children or teenagers, and they moved their way up. They started playing with their 16, whatever that sport may be. Now they're playing on the senior team, and they're maybe from the community. They have friends, family, and those people are way more connected to those clubs because of that kind of longevity. And then it's going across sports as well, right? So, I mean, I think that's really cool. Again, we're both clearly very envious of that system. Oh, definitely. I would love to see something like that here, but I mean, geography, I think, plays against us here in Canada. But.
Absolutely. It totally does. I mean, I guess on the basketball side of things, you do see at a much smaller scale, but it's only basketball, so it doesn't really work. It's like you have club teams, but it's not the same. It's just not the same at all, unfortunately. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe one day I think you're kind of seeing that kind of taking place. In what are they called? Like in schools, they'll have what's the word I'm looking for here? An academy kind of thing. Or like something like that, where it's one school, so then you'll have, but that doesn't scale up beyond. There's an age cap on that, right? There's no pro team, and that's where we have this kind of disconnect. Where I love that system. So, and
then the athletes, once they're done school, right? They're done with that program. It's not
exactly.
You're not building on that. It's. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it's a big difference. Okay. So, speaking of differences, I mentioned running basketball many times. We're talking about wheelchair right off the top. If you have to if you're doing a super small list of like direct things, what are the biggest differences between the game, whether it be rules or actual strategy that make the games, obviously they're basketball, but there's differences. So what would those top ones be?
There's two big rule changes and one strategy thing that I'll kind of touch on here. The two big rule changes is there is no double dribble in wheelchair basketball.
Okay.
So I can dribble the ball, put it on my lap, take pushes, dribble it again, put it on my lap, do that. There is traveling, but it's a little different in the sense that every 2 touches of my wheel, I have to play the ball, whether it's a dribble, pass, or shot.
Got it.
So if I push or pull on my wheel the 3rd time, that's a travel. So those are the only 2 big rule changes. Other than that, we play on a standard court, standard ball, 10-foot rims, 3-point lines the same. So everything's done with the upper body, though. No use of the legs. The biggest strategy change, I would say, is there's no lateral movement in wheelchair basketball. So so if my chair is pointing in a direction, that's the direction I have to go unless I turn the whole chair. Where in the able-bodied game, you're taught to shuffle your feet, right?
Yes,
you're going. If you're in front of me, I'm going to sidestep and go around you. So what we do in wheelchair basketball is we call it a back pick. So if you're trying to get back on defense, I'm going to get my chair in front of you and pick you out to create a new numerical advantage. Also, we got a 5-on-4, a 4-on-3, 2-on-1, etc. And that's the biggest strategy difference from the running game to wheelchair game.
Interesting. So that's probably a pretty big strategy that's super effective, I would imagine, especially in transition.
It's a huge. In wheelchair, we as a coach, you're always talking about crossing up the court because it opens up for passing. Obviously, it makes it easier passing angles. And two, you're rubbing guys out of the play. So if I'm playing against you, I'm crossing in front of you, I'm taking you out of the play. You can't play defense.
Oh, yeah, I get it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's completely different from like you said, like that's not like, you might give a back pick, but it's not the same dynamics are not at play. Like you said, you can't move laterally. Right. So you get stuck. You're like, well, so you're kind of in a situation. And then you had mentioned the traveling rule. So if I push once and the ball's sitting on my lap, and I'm just coasting, I can coast indefinitely, essentially, as long as, like, or I can even have another touch of my thing. But let's say I do the 2, I can coast and I can dribble if I want, or I can pass it, or I can just keep it on my lap. Correct?
Yes.
And
so if you push twice on your wheels, you can coast until someone stops you or until your chair stops moving. Basically. Okay. So if I'm on my baseline and I take 2 hard pushes and no one, like if they're playing a zone defense, for instance, I could coast all the way down to the other baseline or go to bounds if I really wanted to. But
so then like if the ball is on the lap, it's still fair game, right? Like if I have long arms and I reach over and knock it free, like
yes,
it's all good, right? There's no limitation on that.
Now the chair is considered an extension of your body. So if the ball's on my lap and you reach in and you touch my chair or my body, in theory, you're encroaching on my, so it would be a foul. But if you reach in and just knock the ball off my lap, fair game. Like that.
All
that's
good. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. How hard? This is just this pure personal question popped in my head. How hard is it to develop into an outside shooter, and how, like, currently in running basketball, I guess everyone thinks they're an outside shooter. People like to shoot the outside shot.
Curry.
Exactly. Everyone wants to shoot the 3-point shot. But again, I think that might be a different dynamic. And again, I'm just assuming here, like if you're good at shooting the ball from the outside, you're probably pretty damn valuable in that game, being that I would just imagine, you tell me otherwise, that it's just harder to do while you're in a chair. So if you're good at it, there's going to be less other people who have that type of range in comparison to, let's say, like the running game. Is that true? Is that accurate? Or am I way off here?
No, 100% accurate. So if you don't have a good outside shooter on the court, if I'm playing defense against you, I'm packing it in, right? I'll play a tight zone and just like the running game, like if you can't shoot outside, you don't let them get close to the hoop. But the difference is in the wheelchair game. So if I'm a good 3-point shooter as a defender, you got to come out and guard me now. So if I can shoot off the 3-point line too, that's even further that you have to come out. And that creates those picking angles that I was talking about before. I'm going to cross you out. So the more you can extend their defense, the more angles you have to pick, the more lanes you're going to have to cut towards the hoop. So shooting the 3 is essential in our sports. Having a good outside shot is huge, but it's a lot harder. It's a lot different. Because as you know, from this running game, coaches have always taught you from the youngest age, if you're shooting short, put more leg into it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in the wheelchair game, you're sitting down. You can't put any more leg into it than you already have.
So what's the teaching point in that regard? Like, what do you like? Hey, if I'm short, you just need to get stronger, like essentially?
Pretty much. So some of it is technique, shooting mechanics.
Yeah.
And a lot of times kids aren't taught proper shooting mechanics young enough, especially in the wheelchair game. Mm-hmm. So then you ended up getting your guide hand involved too much, trying to force that ball up there. So sometimes you can correct it just with shooting mechanics to generate that power. You might have to start your shot a little bit lower, so it further down on your lap compared to shooting in a post position up higher or whatever. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it's get in the weight room, get stronger.
You get stronger. Yeah, I was going to say, right? Yeah, no kidding. So then when now my brain's just spinning with questions. So one thing that I would imagine is a play that if you were really good at, I mean, you're probably a pretty damn good player, is kind of like in basketball, in running basketball, it's like the run up 3, or the walk up 3. In this case, is that an actual play? Like if you're coming down and they're not guarding the line and you're rolling, like is the idea now I guess I'm getting kind of technical here from a skills perspective. Is it more efficient and I'm guessing the answer is yes, but stop yourself and then line up the shot? Or in some cases, like I'm rolling at a speed that I think I can hit this? Or do you tell people to stop first before they shoot, I guess is the real question.
No, it's kind of unique. Depending on how good of a shooter you are, some players can shoot that three stationary, so they're stopped.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, your momentum, if you're rolling, helps with power. So it's going to help with the distance on the shot. So some people need to be rolling at least a little bit to get that shot off. Now, a transition three is a great threat, though, because defenses usually have their backs turned kind of thing. So if you're able to slow up enough and pop that shot in transition, that's huge.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, momentum can help a shot.
For sure. Okay, so what type of player were you, Joey? Because like, again, running basketball, I know like there's certain player archetypes, right? What is it like in wheelchair, and what type of player were you?
So there are, I guess you do get labeled in wheelchair basketball as well. So, the 1 through 5 kind of thing. So I kind of played a power forward / center. I'm not the biggest guy compared to the running game. I'm only about 6'3", but you're not going to get your 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", 7-footers sitting in a chair, because there's limits to how big the chair can be.
Yes.
So your chair is limited for the height of the cushion, 53 centimeters, I believe it is now. And the width of the chair, you have to be able to fit. If you want to line up for foul shots, you have to be able to fit into the lane for the free throws. Okay. So, you put a Shaquille O'Neal in a chair, he's going to be useless because the chairs just aren't big enough for him. So guys about 6'3" to 6'5" are usually about the biggest that you're going to get in the wheelchair game. So that was kind of the position I did. I was a big guy. I like to, we're talking about chairs banging earlier. That was my game. I'd get inside and bang up with guys and stuff. Yeah. But with that being said, depending on the team I played, like when I played here in Manitoba, we didn't have a lot of skilled players coming out of Manitoba. So obviously I was one of the better players. So I had to rely on my outside game a lot too. So I'd be shooting threes with the team Manitoba. National team, I didn't have to as much, but with whatever team I was with, I would mix it up.
For sure. That's interesting. I mean, again, it's, I'm pretty big into the FIBA 3x3 game.
Oh, yeah.
And I know at certain events in Canada where we've had some semi-professional level, because they have a whole pro system. And I guess this is technically still a pro system. It's just a second level event, but they had like wheelchair, like 3x3, right? So essentially playing the 3x3 rules. And I'm not quite sure what the rule mods are, or if there were any rule mods, but I also thought that was an interesting game. And it's interesting to think of all the different ways you can play basketball, right? And so like, you had talked about the difference between the running game and then the wheelchair game. But now when you take, FIBA 3x3, the running version of it, we'll call it. And then after that, you say, okay, well, now we're going to put wheelchairs on there. All of a sudden, from a strategy perspective, like the game changes, because you were talking about some of those back picks and like those things will come into play, but you also have less players in the play and there's way more space. So that would also change the dynamic of a wheelchair sport as well. So again, kind of a selfish question, but what do you know, or what have you heard, or what's your experience with 3-on-3 basketball and wheelchair, and then maybe the future of it?
It is getting bigger. I know they want to have at the Commonwealth Games, they want to have a wheelchair division for 3v3. Okay. So
like this year, or just like in future games?
No, this summer. So
no way.
It's coming up quick. Are we prepared for it? I don't know.
Yeah.
There are a few rule modifications. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but it's very like, we don't have to change the rules drastically from the able-bodied game to the wheelchair game. So I would assume they're pretty close to being the same, but it changes, like you said, the strategy. All of a sudden it's going to be a lot quicker, right? You score a hoop, you're getting that ball out as quick as you can. Guys don't have to clear as far, so size plays a role in that. So if I get a mismatch on you, I can post you up from 10 feet. Well, that's a shot I'll shoot all day, right? So
exactly.
It'll be interesting, and I'm really interested and curious to see how it evolves with time, because I think everyone has enough athletes to play 3-on-3, and I do believe it's kind of the way of the future for developing athletes. Some of them will obviously transition into the 5-on-5 game, but there's going to be a huge place in our sport, I believe, for the 3-on-3 game. For sure.
Like I said, I've seen it played, and look, again, it was fast, it looked good, looked fun. So I'm kind of biased. I love 5-on-5, but
Right.
I played it, but I'm a 3x3 guy now. I just love the game so much. It's so exciting. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how wheelchair develops. And like, I think the thing you mentioned that was really cool is it actually allows for more opportunity, because when you know this yourself, you have a 3-on-3 tournament. You had mentioned before, you brought out your, like when you were younger, you're like, hey, let me bring my friends out. Well, you only need a couple. You don't need, like you said, the team sizes are so small and you can still compete, but you don't need that many people. So I think those are some of the benefits. And look at countries that aren't going to have as many wheelchair athletes, or maybe just as big of a program. Now they can compete in that discipline because they only need 3-4 good players, and they might just focus all their eggs in that basket, or, at least some of their eggs, or even countries that never had programs, or schools, or, maybe this is an opportunity for, something like U Sport to say, hey, we're going to have a tournament or a series of tournaments, and it's going to support wheelchair basketball, right?
Well, it's interesting you bring this up, because I was just talking to our executive director about this yesterday, and we're looking at trying to host a 3v3 tournament sometime within the next calendar year. So yeah, I was just texting with or emailing Adam, trying to get some input from him about all this. So it's great, a perfect time to bring it up. But hopefully we'll get it together, and maybe we'll get a division. We'll get you out and get you in a chair, and you can.
Hey, you know what? Let's do it, because I don't even play running basketball anymore. I'm kind of like whatever. So maybe this is something that I could try out as a new challenge, right?
Absolutely.
So interesting. Okay, so that was not a tangent I planned, but again, that was more about me, because you know what? I'm curious. I could ask so many questions about it. I was holding back on some really specific questions. I'm like, no one wants to hear that stuff. So, obviously, if anyone who is listening, we are going to be finishing up soon. But if anyone who is listening, obviously, at the end, you'll kind of talk about if people want to get involved in the game, where they can go. But
definitely.
Yeah, we'll get there. So if you're listening, you're interested, we'll definitely let you know. And obviously in the notes as well, there'll be some information on how to see more about Joey, but then also how to get involved in wheelchair sport. So having said that, I have a few questions here about your journey through basketball. Whatever comes to mind in these, don't overthink them too much. Most memorable basketball story.
Oh boy.
And you can tell more than one if you want. It's up to you to just whatever comes to mind.
When you played as long as I did, you tend to rack up a lot of stories. But my favorite part, and I'll say there's a lot of stories that go along with this, but as I said, I love team sports. So playing basketball, you hit those highs, you hit those lows with your buddies, with your teammates. So every championship, and that goes from Paralympic gold medals all the way down to club championships, those wins and losses, the journeys on getting there, so memorable. I mean, I've got friends all over the world now, friends for life that I've met through this sport. But definitely, the winning's always a lot more fun than losing. But when you get to win and celebrate, and I have memories of, celebrating in Rome, Italy, we won a championship there, or Istanbul, celebrating with my buddies into the wee hours of the morning,
of course,
showing up at the airport the next day and pretty rough shape. But those are the memories and the stories that will last with me forever.
For sure. And you've done a lot of winning. Again, I know you're clearly not an arrogant guy. This is very clear, but from the start, you made that very clear when you kind of opened it up. Look, got a lot of awards over the years. So it's I might not remember all of them, especially one that's just some random one, but that totally makes sense. And
it's addictive. I like winning.
Exactly. Okay. So you had mentioned that one. You said, hey, look, and we actually did talk a little bit earlier, about your first opening ceremony and stuff like that. So you have all these memories. So the next question here is your most funny basketball story. So something that happened, and I always preface this because people start thinking too specific. It can literally be at a practice. It can be anything. Tanya McKay told the story about how her son went missing in practice because she was there, and then she was they lost her son, and she was looking around. So whatever comes to mind, funny story from your travels on the planes, whatever.
Oh, I've got a few of those as well, but there's one that it actually lost us a game. I was playing with Manitoba, and we were playing against Ontario, and Ontario was a powerhouse. But we kind of slowly over the years inched closer and closer we finally ended up beating them a couple times. But we're playing that. He ended up becoming the national team head coach for a while too. The big guy who's playing with him, but he had this hairdo, really curly hair. And no one knew this for years until this game, but it was kind of a comb over he did. So he is very, so one of our players, his name is Travis, tried to block his shot and got his hand kind of tangled in his hair and actually pulled the weave off or something. I don't know how he did it. And it was like a tie game with like 3 minutes left or something like that. And all of a sudden he's going down the court and his hair is like a bald spot here and his hair is just kind of flapping up like that. And so I couldn't play anymore. Like I was rolling on the floor laughing so hard that we ended up losing the game, I think, by 3 points. And I was like it's not fair. You can't do that kind of thing. But one of the funniest things, and I probably don't do it justice because you guys don't know who I'm talking about and stuff or see it. But oh my goodness, it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, hold on. So just to clarify, that all happened during the game?
During a game with like 3 minutes left.
That caused you to like break out?
I couldn't focus anymore. I might as well have just sat on the sideline. And he didn't have a chance to fix it. I don't think they had any timeouts left or anything. So every time he's wheeling, his hair is flapping up like this and this big bald spot. And so we're all good friends, obviously, being Canadian.
Of course.
He became so we're talking about it. He's like, I've hid that from everyone in this community for like 20 years. And you guys had to go into, it's pretty funny, but.
Wow. Wow. I have to say, I don't think I've ever had any experiences like that where people were losing their hair.
Literally.
Literally. Yeah. In front of your eyes, I've definitely seen it outside of basketball, but never on the court. Okay. Well, we're almost to the end here. I got a couple more questions. I had mentioned it earlier on. We would tell people how to get involved. So how does someone get involved in wheelchair basketball right now? If they're listening to this, maybe talk about different ages or what they should do to kind of find out more.
Here in Winnipeg, we have a Tuesday kind of drop-in group. So if you have an interest in that, you can reach us here at the office at Manitoba Wheelchair Sports. And we practice here at the Sport for Life Center, and it's open to anyone. I want to really stress this too. Like, we encourage able-bodied participation as well. So if you have a friend, or if you've played the running game and you've blown out your knee, for instance, you still have opportunities in the sport through wheelchair basketball. Bring your buddies out. Like I said, I grew up playing with my brother, and he went on to become the women's head coach, the Canadian women's head coach, won a world championship in 2014 as coaching Team Canada. So that we call it reverse inclusion, get everyone involved. So if you have an interest, reach us here at Manitoba Wheelchair Sports, and we'll put you in touch with the coaches and get you out there playing. And hopefully starting in the fall, we're going to try and get a rec league up and going as well. So hopefully we'll be getting some more games out there for the kids and adults as well. So
awesome. And to be clear, if you're coming to a drop in, you obviously they probably don't have a chair that's available. No. Like, chairs are there for people.
So I say it's a drop in, but we would like to, if you notify us ahead of time, we do have equipment here that you can use. We just need to know the numbers, obviously, beforehand, so we don't have 50 people show up and only have 20 chairs or something along those lines. Yeah,
for sure. So if people listening right now, if you have a child, a friend, or yourself, and I think that's the cool thing about it. And you said it was reverse inclusion?
Reverse integration,
inclusion. Yeah, no, I like that. That's cool. That's a very interesting idea. And I think that was always my misconception. Again, pure ignorance. I'm like, everyone who is playing wheelchair sport, they can't walk.
That's right.
So that's why they're playing. I just assumed that. Right. And oddly enough, so when you went into the Hall of Fame, and Adam tells this story, and he was like, he had some of the same misunderstanding. And I don't know if he met you the first time or what it was, but he was like, Joey can walk, but wait. And then you realize later, you're like, no, like you had said, there's a point system, right? And so depending on what's your level is, you have a different point. So I think it's one of those things. It's open to everybody, like literally. And it might be, you talk about inclusion. Obviously the running game isn't open to everybody, and it's no fault of the game, but it isn't in this case. You know what? And again, obviously there's still limitations there, but it's much more inclusive. So if you're listening and you have a son, daughter, yourself, and you've been limited in some way, maybe by injury or other things, and you want to get out and play a sport that you love, I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for that.
Yeah, that ignorance is definitely there. Another funny story before we ended here. We flew down to Sydney for the 2000 games, and our head coach at the time happened to be a day chair user, so he was in a chair permanently. And I could walk, so I only use my chair for sport. So I'm getting off the flight, and the pilot comes, "Oh, you must be the coach." I'm like, no, that's him. The guy sitting next to me here. It happens all the time. And then the other thing, oh, you must cheat. You walk, you cheat. It's not that. To me, wheelchair basketball, the wheelchair is no different than you need skates to play ice hockey. Yeah. You need a wheelchair to play basketball, or wheelchair basketball, and that's all it is. It's a piece of equipment to play a sport.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Okay, so one last question here. So advice for people who, and I'm going to say, I'm not just going to include wheelchair basketball because your story started with you playing another sport. But people out there who want to have a career like you, they want to have a career like Joey Johnson. What type of advice would you give to them? Like, I'm thinking more, I don't know what the ages are. Someone who maybe even is listening to this and be like, you know what? It would be unbelievable. I would love to go to a Paralympics. I would love to go to a World Championships. I would love to take this sport seriously and kind of move on. What type of advice would you provide to them to kind of achieve those goals?
Well, there's all the cliches. You got to work hard and all that kind of stuff. But the best advice I can give is don't ever quit on yourself. If you have a goal, work your butt off, try and achieve that. I'll never forget. I was talking to he's a good friend of mine. I was at university and we're talking. He's like, "What do you want to do?" I'm like, "Hey, I think after school, I want to try and go to Europe and play professionally." He's like, "Oh, that's no one's going to make enough money playing wheelchair basketball." I'm like, challenge accepted. I'm going to go and do this. And I did. I got to play professionally for 10 years and made a living, supported my family, Same thing. I had a guidance counselor in high school once, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't know if you're the university type, maybe you should look at some trades." And stuff. I'm like, all right. So anyway, to me, when you challenge me, I want to do it. So that's the advice I'd say is just don't quit on yourself. If you have a dream, if you want to try and accomplish something, figure out a way and do it.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And I like the things you brought up because it's other people limiting you.
Exactly.
And then that you believing them like, oh, I guess I can't do this. Yep. Right. And the amount of times I've heard that from people saying like, "Oh, I had someone tell me that this is even possible. You're not good enough to do this." And you know what, at the end of the day, you may not achieve all those things, but if you just believe it and give up, it's like, it's not happening. Like that's 100% failure rate, like without question. So no, I love that advice. And I guess it helps a little bit like you if you're competitive.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's not for everyone. There's a reason why only a handful of people go to the Olympics, Paralympics, stuff like that. Of course. But if it's your dream, work at it, try and make it real. Yeah.
Awesome. Joey, that was awesome. I learned a whole bunch here, and
I
it's super
appreciate
good to hear your story. And I might have to hit you up and come out and hoop a little bit. I mean, like I said, I tried it the one time and it was literally one of the hardest things. I was like, I was much younger. I'm like, get me out of this thing because it's like learning a new skill. Like I was like, I can't do anything that I could do, and so it's a challenge.
I'll give you some pointers.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. And I'm a little older now, so I'm kind of like more open to like, yeah, let's try that. I'm not good at it, so maybe I should be doing it type thing. So
perfect.
Cool. All right.
I look forward to it.
We'll say goodbye. Oh, and yeah, absolutely. Get a 3-on-3 tournament. I think that would be amazing. I would love to see that kind of expand. Like, again, I love the game. So, I am going to be, doing some stuff with Adam and 3x3 and all that stuff. So it might be something that we even work together.
Awesome.
With that. So I appreciate you, Joe. You take care.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
All right. Okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please like, subscribe, follow, and share this series, and reach out to us with your comments on the show. Thanks again for joining us.